Hello, and welcome to the Leadership Edge. I am your host, Ted Gorski. The Leadership Edge is a show that focuses on leadership topics that are affecting leaders on a daily basis. Our show is a practical guide in which we give tips and techniques to kind of handle those daily issues so that you can become better leaders every day. And in today's show, we're going to talk about communication style. And we're going to talk about a particular communication style that you will see in the workplace. And today we're going to talk a little bit about this style to get you an understanding on how this style sees the world. So today's show is going to focus on what's called the Steadiness communication style. But before we dive into the actual style itself, let's really step back and kind of look at it and talk about some of the things in terms of the style, how the style sees the world. One of my favorite quotes is from the late Stephen Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he says we see the world not as it is, but as we are. Basically, what we're talking about here is each communication style, and specifically today's focus, which is the Steadiness communication style, sees the world through their lens. Basically, their particular style helps them understand how they approach problems, how they solve problems, and kind of how they function on a daily basis. But it's important for us as leaders to understand that these people or this particular style sees the world through their particular lens. And the whole focus here is to realize that their lens is how they see the world. It doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong. It's important for us as leaders to understand this perspective and this lens so that you can kind of deal with them and communicate with this style successfully. So when we start looking at the process of communication, this is a model that kind of gives you a great insight in kind of how communication works. As the speaker is the person who is initiating the conversation. And usually there is some type of message, which is that cloud in the middle of the screen, and we have a listener who's receiving our message. Now, as the speaker is encoding a message. And encoding means that they package it in a way that's comfortable to that style. The best analogy I can give you is when you encode a message, think about it as you're wrapping up a present. And what you're doing is taking your message, putting it in the box, and wrapping that present up. And you wrap it up according to your style, what's comfortable to you and how you like to wrap it. On the other hand, the listener is decoding. And what they're doing is taking that package or taking that present, and what they're doing is decoding or unwrapping that particular present according to their style. So when they unwrap it, open up that box, take your message, they are now looking at it from their particular lens or their perspective. So if by chance you're communicating with someone who's a similar style, normally this flow would be relatively seamless. The problem and challenges that kind of happen is when you're dealing with a different style, this is where miscommunication can occur. This is when the messages get mixed. Or most importantly, when you get your deliverable, you kind of look at it and say, what is this? That kind of explains why there's a disconnect. But going back to the slide, let's now kind of talk a little bit about the 3 elements that make up on how, for example, I package a message. One of the ways that I package a message is through body language. It's how I stand, how I'm sitting, whether I'm using my hands or not, and most importantly, facial expressions. Each of those encompass what we call body language. Second way that we kind of package a message is through our tone of voice. How fast we're going, how slow we're going. Are we loud, are we soft? So tone of voice is also something that encompasses how we deliver a message. And finally, it's the words. It's the physical packaging of the words. So you can see those 3 elements in the top right of that screen is ways that a speaker encodes a message. However, if you look on the bottom right of the screen, the listener decodes the message. And guess what? They use the same 3. they use the same three of body language, tone, and words. So this is why what happens is that if we're similar styles, we're not saying everything is identical. We're not saying that your body language is exact. We're not saying your tones are exact, but they're similar enough that the message gets through successfully. The challenge becomes when we have different styles, because what ends up happening is that there's a miscommunication and a misinterpretation. They kind of read your style and they watch the body language, and if it's different, they're interpreting it different. In terms of volume and tone of voice, they're interpreting that different as well. This is why we have miscommunication with various styles. So we're going to focus today on the steadiness, or what's called the S style. And the key focus I want you to be really looking at today is this particular style is all about pace and consistency. This style likes to go at a nice leisurely pace. They want things to kind of slow down so that they can kind of deal with stuff. They're all about consistency because this style is all about habit. This style is about having a habitual approach to things. This is a type of style that goes to work at the same time, leaves the house at the same time, takes the same way to work. It is all about habits. And of course, because of that, this style does not like to get surprised. So these are the real focus issues of this particular style. But now let's talk about the two-dimension breakdown, how they see the world and what's important to them. Well, the first thing about this style is they see themselves as less powerful, meaning when they do see things or in the workplace, they don't feel that they have the power to change things. They just want to understand what's needed of them, what's expected of them, and they'll go along with it. So for them, they see themselves as a cog in the wheel. I don't have the power to change things, just kind of tell me what to do. And second part is that they see the environment as favorable. They only see the good things in the environment. So when they're viewing things and dealing with things, they rather not really look at or deal with anything that's negative and what's happening maybe in the workplace or in the office. This style wants to focus on the favorable side of things. They want to be focusing only on the good stuff. So you can see how this style kind of really perceives the world. So as we kind of be looking at this particular model, we're going to be focusing on the bottom right today, in which this style, the S style, the steadiness style, is a very people-oriented style, but now they're more into the slower pace. This style is very methodical and logical in kind of how they get along and how they move along. So we're looking at this style. When we talk about slow, we're talking about slow thinkers. This style likes to think things through. So just realize they don't like to rush through things, but they're a style here that really likes to marinate and reflect on issues. So let's kind of talk about some of the general characteristics of this particular style. Let's talk about what's important to them. So some general descriptors of this style is this is a style that's very amiable and friendly. This is a style when they walk into the workplace and talk to people, basically what they're doing is they're really going to start off with personal comments. They're going to ask people how they're doing. Not going to go into a lot of details. Maybe ask you how your weekend was. Fine, great, okay, then let's move on. But this style is extremely friendly. Great listeners. They will listen to people. They will understand their point of view. This is a style that can kind of see both sides of an issue. Very patient and relaxed style. And I call this style kind of the steady eddies. They're the people you see every day that go at they show up the same way. They don't get too loud, they don't get too soft, they don't get too happy, they don't get too sad. Just they stay calm and composed every day. Every time you see them in the office, they're the same way. In terms of the value to the team, in the middle column now, we're starting to look at what do they bring to the team? Well, this is your dependable player. This is your reliable player. This is the person in your team that's really going to show up every day and they're going to work with other team members. Again, this style is extremely patient and logical, but more importantly, this style is extremely service-oriented. Their goal in their life, that's part of their DNA, is servicing and helping others. So realize that this particular style is all about service. This is why this style is great in customer service, because they want to help others. So there's a key element here. We're going to talk more about the service orientation a little bit later in the show. In terms of an ideal environment, this style likes little conflict. When they sense there's conflict in the office, they're the ones that are going to hide under the table. They're the ones that are going to remove themselves from the situation. Or more importantly, they'll stay extremely quiet. So not a big fan of conflict, this particular style. In terms of under stress, this style can get hesitant because they're afraid of making a mistake. So basically, they're going to be kind of wavering on both sides of an issue to try to figure out what's the best way in terms of making a decision. In terms of limitations, this particular style, again, will yield to controversy. They will not share their perspective. They'll kind of like step away. And this style's emotion is not emotional, meaning the style does not show emotions. It's like when you watch one of those poker shows on TV and they show the person's card and they have absolutely nothing in their hand. What ends up happening is you look at their face and they actually show no emotion. That's this particular style, that when they get stressed, you literally can't read whether they're happy, sad, angry, or distressed. So some important things to remember about this particular style. Some examples, well, there's Andy Griffin. Andy Griffin that used to play in the various shows, always that very calm, composed kind of characters that he always played. There is the old Mr. Rogers in the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood, right? Put on the nice little sweater, come sit down, let's be relaxed. That was your typical S example. And Charlie Brown, Charlie Brown in the comics, where Lucy would always pull the football from him, was always that S style. And lastly, we have Tonto. Tonto, who always helped the Long Ranger in everything he had to do, was your quintessential S style. So I kind of give you some examples of typical S characters that you may have seen or bumped into. But let's talk a little bit more about this style and just kind of talk about some of the key things that's important to understand. This style is extremely introverted. This is not an extroverted type of person. They will kind of keep to themselves, especially in meetings. This style may not necessarily say much, but they'll kind of keep to themselves because they're listening and observing. Remember, some of the key points we already talked about: amiable, friendly, good listener. S's are great managers because they can listen to their employees. They listen to facts, they listen to issues, and they can kind of make the right decision. So this style is an extremely good listener when they're dealing with people. Extremely patient. This style has a patience of a saint. So that's why when they're dealing with customer service, always this style does well because of their ability to be patient, especially in stressful situations. Great team players. This style is about building relationships. So they love working on teams, love kind of building those relationships, both internally into the team and externally into the team. So just realize that this style just really enjoys that. So if you're building a team and you need people who are going to be working with each other, this style is a great style to have on your team. And lastly, this style is extremely loyal. This person's loyal to the team, they're loyal to the company. So they're great in terms of having them on your team and having them in your organization. But let's talk about this style in meetings. Let's talk about what do they do in meetings in regards to how they show up. Well, as I mentioned earlier, very quiet and very reserved. This style is not necessarily going to chirp up. They're really not going to say much. Now, if you turn to them and ask their opinion, then they'll certainly share. But realize that most of the time, they're kind of quiet and reserved. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how you might be able to deal with that or maybe get them to open up a little bit more, because there's some key things that you can do as a leader to kind of have them participate more. In meetings, extremely level-headed. This style is extremely calm and composed. They don't get emotional. So they're the type of people you want in a meeting because they're going to keep things relatively balanced. However, this style is extremely slow decision maker because they can see both sides of an issue. This style, because they can see both sides, have difficulty in making quick decisions. They really want to think things through. This style wants to process what they hear. So realize that if you have these people on your team, if they're dealing with team members and they have to make decisions or even give their viewpoint, this style really needs to kind of percolate on all the information before they can really chime up and give their point of view. The other thing about this style too is they're very low energy. The way they move around, the way they kind of deal with others, they kind of come across as very lethargic. But just realize that's kind of their style. It's kind of how they operate. Other styles kind of see that and go, come on, let's go. Realize that this style is kind of like that. So these are some key elements that I want you to realize with S's in meetings, kind of how they see things and how they kind of process things. But let's talk about some of their blind spots, because this style does have some blind spots that really cause other styles to get frustrated. First of all, this style does not project a sense of urgency. Now, here's a key factor with a lot of the coaching I do, especially with leaders who have this style on their team. I have leaders who are, as maybe you are, have a very solid sense of urgency that you can actually see if I gave you a task that was quite challengeable to you, that I would see that sense of urgency. This particular style doesn't display it, although they understand the sense of urgency. So this is what gets frustrated with some of the other styles, is because they're wired to have that sense of urgency, but yet when they look at an S or a steadiness person and they see kind of nice relaxed outside shell, it's almost like they want to shake them and say, do you understand what the importance of this is? Realize that they do. It's that they don't display it. It's an important key factor. This style internalizes their feelings. They're not going to say what they are. They're not going to communicate them. They kind of keep them kind of inside themselves. And the other key thing to understand with this style is they're going to need help with new projects. I won't tell you how many times for non-S leaders who get very frustrated when they assign a project to this particular style that's relatively new for this style, who hasn't dealt with this particular type of project, that they start to slow down or they don't know how to get started. And as a result, things kind of fall behind in terms of the project. Realize if you're giving this style a new project, that you might have to help them a little bit. You might have to help them along to kind of move it forward. And once they kind of get going, then I think they'll be in a better place. So realize if something's brand new to this style, they may not jump on it or show a lot of initiatives. But let's talk about their value, because this style does bring some value to the team. As we mentioned, very dependable, very patient, very logical. This style is a very relationship-driven style. So when they're on a team, they're the ones that are going to really foster the relationships, both within the team and outside of the team. Realize that this style is going to work extremely hard. They are going to finish tasks because their goal, again, is to service others, and their goal is to help others. So realize that this style really is a style that really will step up and even help team members who are falling behind. So they don't mind rolling up their sleeves. They don't mind helping others. So realize they're great people to have on your team because they're going to make sure the task gets done. But how do we recognize this style? How do you, if you're looking in your office, maybe it's outside of your team, how do you know that you're dealing with, or there might be another peer that might be this style? Well, there's a couple of key factors here to take a look at. Number one, they have a very relaxed pace. When you see them walking down the hallway, it's going to be very relaxed. It's not going to be a quick kind of motion. When they sit down in the meeting, they're going to sit down in a very relaxed way. They're going to sit down, maybe cross their legs, lean back, put their hands behind their head. It's like they're sitting in a comfortable chair. So just watch how they're sitting. Secondly, their office looks very homey. They'll have pictures, maybe plants, maybe a circular table in their office that when you sit down in their office, we go sit at that particular circular table versus that old-fashioned regular table. So look for homey things, pictures, plants, things that trinkets they have from trips they're taking. That kind of gives you a sense. They have warm conversations. They're basically very friendly conversations. Their tone is very discussion level. They're not going to raise their voice. They're not going to be loud. They're not going to be soft. It's going to be very discussion kind of level conversation. And most likely they dress in casual, comfortable kind of clothing. So it kind of gives you some clues on whether or not you're dealing with this particular style. Now, how do we influence this style? How do we kind of deal with, okay, maybe you have someone on your team. Maybe you have to work with somebody. Here are some key things that you need to do to kind of influence in dealing with this style. Number one, I want you to appreciate them. Appreciate their efforts. Appreciate what they bring to the team. So it's important to say that to them. I know I've worked with some S's who don't get any feedback for over a year. And it actually impacts them and impacts their performance. So appreciate them and make sure you provide that type of feedback. Second main thing is respect the marination process. When you marinate a certain steak, chicken, or fish, there is a process to it. You might put it in a Tupperware. You put your favorite seasonings in, and you let it soak. And you may let it soak for a period of time. But then when you are finished on one side, you got to flip it over on the other. It's a whole process to it. Well, guess what? Marination to the S is the same way. If you're dealing with them, in dealing with issues, they got to think about it. So you have to respect that. So what I tell non-S's who are dealing with this particular style is you have to tee up the issue for them. Meaning, if you have a meeting the next morning that you're going to discuss some real big issues, go to this particular style the night before, right before they leave, and just say, hey, tomorrow we're going to talk about these issues at the meeting, and I'm going to be asking you these 3 questions. I want you to think about them so that when we have the meeting tomorrow, you'll have some clear answers. Well, what happens is that this particular style will take it, run with it, and begin the marination process. And it is amazing what happens the next day when you have that meeting and you ask that question. All these ideas will come up because marination has occurred. So respect it. Now, what I'm saying here is if it's a major issue, they may need a half a day to kind of think about it. If it's a minor issue, it doesn't take long, maybe a half an hour, 20 minutes or so. But don't demand an answer right away because this style is still percolating on it and needs the time. Realize when you approach these styles, use a level tone, very discussion level. Start with a personal comment. Hi, how are you? How's your day going? That's all they need. They want to know that they're respected as a human. And finally, be very logical. This style moves from step A to step B to step C. So kind of have a logical approach with this particular style. Now, here is a final piece of tip I can give you when you're working with this style. One of the magical comments that will work extremely well with this style is when you approach them, if you just simply go up to them and say, I need your help, this style will drop everything. Because as we said earlier, this style is a very service-oriented style, and in their DNA is to help others. So as long as you walk over to them and say it in that way, I need your help, not coming across assertive, aggressive, but very discussion level in their approach, this style will drop everything to help you. And I will tell you, I've taught this particular technique to a lot of leaders, and it works fabulously. So I challenge you to try that. So today we talked about this style, and my goal here today is to leave you with an action plan. And your action plan is to apply some of the techniques that we talked about today. Apply some of the things, respect marination. Slow your pace down when you're dealing with this style. This style goes at about 50 miles an hour. So kind of approach them in that style. Respect the marination. When you tee something up, let them think about it. And use a discussion level approach with this style. You will see that you'll get an enormous amount of impact if you use these approaches when you're working with this style. So if there's anything we can do to help you with your leadership needs, please reach out to us at www.getyouredge.com, and we'd be more than happy to see what we can do to help you with your leadership needs. So again, I want to thank you for watching today's show. Again, my name is Ted Gorski. Thanks for watching The Leadership Edge, and see you next time on The Leadership Edge.